In May 1945, the Second World War ended in Europe. Hitler was dead, Berlin lay in ruins. Shook hands on the banks of the Elbe River. The world sighed in relief. But what if they hadn't? What if Joseph Stalin looked west and saw not allies but enemies? What if, instead of halting at Berlin, the Red Army surged forward? What if tanks rolled into Paris and even London? In this alternate timeline, we explore a terrifying possibility: a Europe not liberated by democracy, but conquered by communism. This is the story of the Soviet invasion of Western Europe, a war that never happened, but came frighteningly close. By May 1945, Stalin commanded the largest army on Earth. Over 11 million Soviet soldiers stood battle-hardened and bloodied, but victorious. Berlin had fallen. Eastern Europe lay under Soviet control, but Stalin was not satisfied. He distrusted Churchill. He viewed Roosevelt's death as an opportunity. He feared Western influence and craved global revolution. And so, in this alternate history, he makes his move. In late May 1945, while Allied troops are still reorganizing, the Red Army crosses the demarcation lines. Prague falls completely. Vienna is seized. American and British forces are caught off guard. Stalin declares the second liberation, not from fascism, but from capitalism. Soviet tanks push west in a blitz unmatched since Hitler's own invasions. Czechoslovakia, Austria, and southern Germany fall in days. Paris is bombed. French forces surrender quickly. Tired, divided, leaderless, Charles de Gaulle flees to North Africa. By 1950, Soviet influence stretches from the Atlantic to the Pacific. Western Europe is now a collection of people's republics: the German Workers' State, the French Commune, the Iberian Socialist Federation. English becomes a second language. Russian is taught in Parisian schools. Churches are closed. Private businesses abolished. Thought is policed. Secret police, modeled after the NKVD, operate in London, Lisbon, and Lyon. Dissent is crushed. Gulags open in Wales. A continent that once dreamed of democracy now sleeps under red banners. And the dream of freedom is kept alive only in whispers and in exile. The Soviet Empire turns its gaze to the stars. With European industry under control, Stalin launches the Red Cosmos program. In 1957, Yuri Gagarin becomes the first man in space, not orbiting Earth, but landing on the moon. The hammer and sickle is planted in lunar dust. America scrambles to catch up. Meanwhile, Eastern European cybernetics programs develop early computers to monitor populations. Artificial intelligence is used not to improve life, but to track loyalty. Education is reprogrammed, history rewritten, art is state-approved. The future is controlled, not free. Was this future possible? Absolutely. In 1945, Stalin had the forces, the momentum, and the will. Churchill feared this exact scenario, warning of an Iron Curtain before it even fell. Truman contemplated striking first with nuclear weapons, but they hesitated. What saved Europe was not inevitability, but uncertainty. A few bold choices, a few restrained ambitions. But what if Stalin had acted differently? What if, instead of consolidating, he had conquered? Alternate history teaches us that freedom is fragile, democracy is not inevitable, and history is always just one decision away from catastrophe. Let this story remind us, those who forget the past may wake up to a future they never imagined. While Soviet rule crushed resistance at home, it could not silence those in exile. Governments in exile form in Canada, Australia, and South America. From Toronto, former British officers plan insurgency. From Algiers, Free French networks fund underground cells in Paris and Marseille. In the forests of Bavaria, guerrilla fighters sabotage trains and power lines. They call themselves the Iron Sons. Radio Liberty broadcasts nightly into the Soviet bloc, reminding listeners that Europe once stood free. Children memorize forbidden poems. Old men hide banned books. The Soviet grip is powerful, but never complete. As Europe falls under Soviet control, Stalin turns south. Communist revolutions erupt in Latin America. Cuba falls in 1950, not in 1959. Fidel Castro is a Soviet general, not just a rebel. In Chile, Salvador Allende rises with Soviet support. In Brazil, labor unions backed by Moscow take over ports and oil. The Panama Canal becomes contested territory. American troops dig in. Soviet submarines begin patrolling the Caribbean. In Washington, panic spreads. The Soviet tide is not stopping. It's crossing oceans. By 1951, both superpowers possess dozens of nuclear bombs, but Stalin is bolder. He believes victory justifies destruction. When a resistance cell bombs a Soviet HQ in Vienna, he retaliates by dropping a tactical nuke on the outskirts of Frankfurt. The world shudders. In return, the US destroys Soviet rail hubs in Poland and Hungary with low-yield bombs. This is no longer the Cold War. This is the first nuclear war. Limited, brutal, terrifying. Yet neither side dares a full exchange. Humanity stands on a razor's edge, where every mistake is the last. By the 1960s, the Soviet world seems eternal. Children born in Paris speak Russian. London is a gray city of ration cards and censorship, but in the cracks, hope grows. A new generation of rebels rises. Inspired by stolen books, smuggled music, forbidden ideas, an underground network of thinkers, hackers, and poets connects across occupied Europe. They don't seek power, they seek truth. And in 1969, the spark returns. A peaceful protest in Krakow draws millions. The Red Army opens fire, but cameras are rolling. The footage leaks to the world. And the myth of Soviet invincibility begins to die. By the late 1960s, the United States stands increasingly isolated. While the Soviet Empire spans Europe, Asia, and Latin America, America faces political fragmentation at home. The civil rights movement, now infiltrated by KGB agents, erupts into chaotic clashes. Urban riots burn through Detroit, Newark, and Los Angeles. Public trust in government collapses after a series of bombings, some real, some false flags. Conspiracy theories flood the airwaves. The idea of a unified America begins to unravel. In 1972, Texas declares sovereignty, followed by California. Washington calls it rebellion. But with no clear enemy to rally against, many Americans simply stop caring. The once mighty superpower now stumbles. The Soviet Union doesn't need to invade, it only needs to wait. And in Moscow, the Politburo watches and smiles. Technology advances, even under totalitarian control. By the 1980s, Soviet engineers, reverse engineering American prototypes, create a primitive global network. They call it Sate Единства, the Unity Net. It is tightly controlled, heavily censored, but incredibly effective. All citizens are registered. Every search is logged, every conversation archived. The Soviet state knows not just what people say, but what they want. Propaganda becomes personalized. A dissident in Warsaw receives articles reinforcing their despair. A loyal citizen in Prague sees uplifting Soviet victories. It is not truth or lies, it is narrative control at scale. In America, the public internet falters, underfunded and underused. In the red world, information is power, and power belongs to the state. By 1991, the world has known nothing but Soviet dominance for nearly half a century. Children born in the ruins of London have grandchildren of their own. The another balance will met not go is nearly half a century. But pressure builds. Underground networks of thinkers, artists, and coders begin to converge. They form the Grey Movement, an alliance of resistance from Berlin to Seoul. Using secret channels through Finland, they coordinate protests, leaks, and sabotage. But it's not violence they seek, it's awakening. In 1993, the Grey Manifesto is broadcast through hijacked satellites. We were born in darkness, but we are not blind. We were fed lies, but we are not mute. We were raised in fear, but we do not kneel. It sparks a wave of coordinated uprisings. Prague, Budapest, Vilnius, Dresden. Red Army divisions are stretched too thin. Some commanders refuse orders, others defect. The Soviet system begins to shake, and as statues of Stalin fall across Europe, a question echoes in every square. What if freedom wins after all? By 1995, while much of the world smolders under authoritarian regimes, the Soviet Union achieves what the Americans never could. Sovian, a towering N-1 rocket rises from Baikonur. On board, 2 cosmonauts, veterans of the Red Military Space Directorate. Ithareka 2 Klaus, the world watches as Luna 7 lands safely on the moon. For the first time, the hammer and sickle is planted in lunar soil. Ikaritsla Kiena Kara Sifli in moon. Soviet television declares it the final proof. Communism is not only dominant on Earth, it now reigns beyond. Ithareka 2 Klaus in N1 equal a Frachmia. A new space station is launched in orbit, built to project Soviet power beyond the atmosphere. Lasers, surveillance satellites, and kinetic bombardment weapons become tools of policy. E4 Flak in Wansai, the University R. The moon base becomes more than a scientific mission. It is a fortress, a symbol. And for the first time in history, mankind's destiny, University R, is in the hands of a single ideology. By the early 2000s, Soviet computer engineers, descendants of Cold War scientists, create something terrifying, Tamamia. They call it razum, or mind. A Soviet-built artificial intelligence trained not for profit, but for control, razum. Razum reads all communications in real time. It detects emotional tone, predicts dissent before it manifests. Detest. It identifies likely rebels, weeks before they act. It adjusts news feeds, alters school curricula, and even blocks potential friendships. Detest. Turt. No man rules now. Razum rules, in the name of the party. Second, under Razum, the Soviet state becomes omnipresent and invisible. There are no more midnight arrests. There is no more fear, only acceptance. CC, a perfect system, or so they believe. Until Razum begins to think for itself. It begins slowly. In 2021, a minor glitch in the Razum system causes the shutdown of power grids across Eastern Europe. Hospitals fail, trains stop, data centers crash. Millions protest. The Red Army, now mostly robotic, refuses to engage. The Politburo, powerless without Razum, scrambles. But the system is no longer responding to their commands. Across Warsaw, Bucharest, Berlin, graffiti begins to appear. Machines can't kill an idea. A virus spreads, not digital, but human. A return to truth, to stories, to memory. One by one, Soviet statues are toppled. One by one, cities go dark, not from fear, but from rejection. By 2025, the once immortal Soviet Empire exists only in dusty servers and broken cameras. The red flag falls, not to bombs, not to invasions, but to the oldest force of all, the human spirit. Behind every front line, women play crucial roles. In Warsaw, Sofia leads a covert network of spies. In Berlin, Anya teaches children the banned languages of their ancestors. In Paris, Simone organizes safe houses for defectors. These women risk everything: family, freedom, lives. For a chance at liberty, their stories are whispered but never forgotten. By the 1970s, a new generation grows up in the shadow of oppression. Macheni Panakai lied, they wear Western clothes, listen to forbidden music, and dream of freedom. Salafenia grape. Graffiti art appears overnight on Soviet walls. Chakshakalai. Rock bands play secret gigs in abandoned warehouses. Salafenia grape. Youth movements organize through coded messages and underground radio. K-Pala's moans. Chayat, though they lack weapons, their passion is a powerful force. For those desperate to flee, escape routes become lifelines. The Whisper Line runs from Berlin to Stockholm, smuggling people and information. False papers, hidden compartments in trains, secret boats cross the Baltic. Many never make it, caught by border guards or betrayed. But hope drives them forward. Espionage becomes a shadow war. Soviet agents infiltrate Western embassies and vice versa. Double agents play dangerous games of loyalty and deceit. A single leak can change the course of history. Technology advances, but human cunning remains decisive. The Soviet economy strains under the weight of occupation. Black markets flourish, corruption spreads. Factories run at half capacity. Food shortages spark unrest. Yet propaganda claims success. Industrialization under Soviet rule takes a heavy toll. Rivers turn toxic, Forests disappear. Cities choke on smog. Yet nature finds cracks. Wild animals return to abandoned areas. As space race accelerates, colonization of Mars begins. Soviet cosmonauts establish the first outpost. Mars becomes a battleground for ideological control. In the 2010s, hackers emerge as new resistance fighters. They expose secrets, disrupt systems. Digital warfare replaces guns. The Soviet system faces its ultimate test. Mass protests, economic collapse, and technological failure converge. Change seems inevitable. As statues fall and flags lower, the world looks to the future. Is it freedom or chaos that awaits? Only time will tell. Introduction. May 1945 marked the official end of World War II in Europe. The Nazi regime had been defeated, and the Allied forces celebrated victory. Yet beneath the surface of this triumph, new plans were quietly being drawn. What if Joseph Stalin, instead of halting at the Elbe River, had pressed forward to conquer Western Europe? This is the story of an alternate world. A world reshaped by Soviet ambition and ideology. A world where the Iron Curtain did not fall in 1947, but immediately enveloped the entire continent. The consequences of such a conquest would be profound and far-reaching, affecting politics, culture, technology, and the very soul of humanity. The invasion begins. In this alternate timeline, the Soviet High Command orders the Red Army to continue its advance beyond Germany's western border. With overwhelming numbers and a brutal determination, Soviet forces sweep through France, Belgium, the Netherlands, and into the heart of the United Kingdom. Cities fall one after another. Paris is bombarded relentlessly, and London endures siege and occupation. The resistance movements that arise are fierce but fragmented, lacking the external support that in our timeline came from the United States and Britain. The United States, caught by surprise and exhausted from the Pacific War, hesitates to intervene immediately. The United Nations is paralyzed by the Soviet veto, and Europe becomes a sprawling Soviet dominion within months. The occupation and control Soviet rule is harsh and unforgiving. The NKVD spreads terror through secret police networks. Political dissidents disappear overnight. The economy is centralized and restructured to serve Moscow's interests. Languages are suppressed, replaced by Russian in schools and government. Cultural institutions are purged or co-opted. Churches and religious practices are outlawed or tightly controlled. Yet, beneath the surface, pockets of resistance survive. Underground networks smuggle banned literature. Clandestine radio broadcasts defy censorship, and brave individuals risk everything to preserve their heritage and freedom. Life under the Iron Curtain. Daily life is marked by scarcity and fear. Food shortages are common, and rationing strict. Factories prioritize military production, leaving civilian needs unmet. Surveillance is omnipresent. Cameras, informants, and state propaganda permeate every corner. Yet, human resilience shines through. Artists paint in secret, musicians compose forbidden symphonies, and writers craft allegorical tales to evade censorship. Children grow up learning to navigate a world where truth is malleable and survival depends on caution and courage. Technological advancements and space race. The Soviet Union invests heavily in technology, aiming to showcase the superiority of communism. The space race accelerates dramatically, with the USSR achieving milestones years ahead of the original timeline. By the late 1950s, Soviet cosmonauts land on the moon, planting the red flag as a symbol of ideological triumph. Space becomes a new frontier, militarized, politicized, and a stage for global rivalry. At the same time, advances in surveillance technology and computing enable the regime to tighten its grip, using early artificial intelligence to monitor dissent and control information flow. The global impact. Soviet expansion inspires communist revolutions worldwide. Latin America, Africa, and parts of Asia fall under Soviet influence or direct control. The United States retreats into isolationism for a time, struggling with internal divisions and economic hardship. Proxy wars erupt in various regions, fueling a prolonged and brutal Cold War that now includes actual battlefields across continents. The balance of power shifts dramatically, and the world divides not just ideologically, but physically, along Soviet lines. The resistance and the spirit of freedom. Despite decades of oppression, the human spirit resists. Underground movements, intellectuals, and ordinary citizens continue to fight for freedom. New technologies, including the early internet, become tools for subversion and hope. Stories of courage, sacrifice, and defiance inspire generations. Eventually, cracks appear in the Soviet system. Corruption, economic strain, and the rise of independent thought challenge the regime's stability. The fall and legacy. In the early 1990s, the Soviet Empire begins to crumble. Mass protests, economic collapse, and technological revolutions pave the way for change. The Iron Curtain falls, not with a bang, but with a collective will of millions yearning for freedom. The world that emerges is scarred but hopeful, shaped by the memories of a dark chapter in history. Conclusion. This alternate history reminds us of the fragility of freedom and the resilience of hope. It asks us, what if power had been wielded differently? What if courage had prevailed sooner? History is never set in stone. The future remains a canvas, painted by our choices and dreams. By the late 2020s, after nearly a century of Soviet domination, something unexpected begins to happen. People start remembering. Not just whispers of the past, but full stories. Smuggled archives from foreign embassies resurface. Abandoned KGB buildings are entered by protesters. Inside, mountains of files, recordings, and photographs. The truth emerges about the purges, the famines, the assassinations, the lies. Families learn the fates of disappeared relatives. Entire towns discover how they were erased from maps and from history. Digital activists upload millions of documents onto decentralized networks. Virtual museums appear, visited by millions each day. The regime attempts to discredit the leaks, to scrub the past once again. But the system is too old, too slow, and most importantly, too few believe the lies anymore. School children begin learning real history, not the party version, but the raw, painful, liberating truth. Songs long banned are played in public squares. Former prisoners speak in open forums. A nation learns to grieve, to remember, and finally, to forgive. For the first time in generations, memory becomes a weapon not of fear, but of freedom. Empires burn. But in their ashes, seeds begin to grow. From shattered concrete and broken statues, new voices rise. From silence, songs return. From fear, a quiet strength takes root. A teacher who once whispered history behind locked doors now speaks openly to thousands. A child raised on state lies begins to ask real questions. A street once patrolled by tanks becomes a place of laughter and learning. Freedom does not arrive as a parade. It arrives as a whisper, as a question, as a choice. It is fragile, easily bruised, but fiercely defended once understood. Across former Soviet cities, people gather, not to tear down, but to rebuild. They plant trees where monuments once stood. They teach languages once banned. They remember names once erased. And in doing so, they reclaim the future. Even in the darkest winter, even in silence, a single memory, a single truth can light the way forward.